All right, so first episode of the Darkest Theory podcast. I'm Subtle with ScrapBrain. So we're gonna kind of just start out talking about the new chapter with Tools of Torment, new killer, two new survivors, bunch of perks, map updates, perk updates, all that kind of stuff. For those who know us, hello again, welcome back.
Yo.
For those who don't know, I'm Subtle. My socials are Z Subtle, so you might have encountered me there. I stream occasionally on Twitch, do TikTok stuff with clips, play both sides. Been playing basically since the game came out. Main Huntress on killer side, and on survivor side, Ash, but more recently maining Michaela, who's my only Prestige 100 character so far. So, and then Scrap, if you want, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, I'm ScrapBrain. All of my socials are ScrapBrain SC2. And I stream on Twitch pretty regularly. I'm a variety streamer. I haven't been streaming much Dead by Daylight, but I do play off stream all the time. I also play both sides. On killer side, I main Demo, and on the survivor side, I dual main Ada and Fang. I've been a very long time Fang main, but once Ada came out, I was really a fan of the character, and she is my P100 character as well. Yeah, that's me.
That basically covered. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess the main focus, right, of most chapters is the new killer. I think that's like what makes and defines a chapter for the most part. So new killer, Skull Merchant.
Oh boy.
Reception has been
Mixed.
mixed, leaning negative, I would say, for the most part. I think
Yeah.
she's definitely stronger than she was on the PTB with some of the buffs that they gave her, right? For those who might not know how the killer works, has a bunch of drones that she can place around the map that detect survivors. If you're inside of the range for long enough, you become exposed. If she's sitting inside of the range of her drones, she gains Undetectable, which means no red stain, no terror radius, things like that, no heartbeat. Refer to it like that. So the thing that's most frustrating, I think, just touching on her really briefly, is that in quick summation, she's basically a 3-gen killer because she doesn't have any real chase power, she doesn't have any real movement ability, and so she basically just kind of hovers certain areas and tries to defend the generators because she doesn't have any super effective way of getting to the survivors really quickly. So I guess I'll turn it to you first. First reactions, interpretations now that we've had her in live for about like a week.
Yeah, so not only does she not have any movement potential, she actually in my experiences has anti-movement potential. Like, not only does she set up the drones in specific locations and wants to hover there, but she also has the information tracking from her little tracker pad that is based off of those locations that she's already placed the drones at. Um, and so not only is she incentivized to stay by her drones to gain that undetectable status to punish killer or punish survivors who may be exposed, but the information tracking that she has is also designed for that same area itself also. So in so many different ways, she is designed to be a 3-gen killer, which is a design philosophy that um, Behavior has really been leaning into for a lot of their original content killers. And, you know, it seems to me like with a lot of these killers that we're running into, the frustration is twofold. On the killer side, um, especially specifically for the Skull Merchant, the survivors are able to disable her power. And there's not really any interaction that the killer has outside of just placing the drones. And on the survivor side, this 3-gen playstyle that has become so prevalent is incredibly boring and leads to very drawn out games. So that's kind of my initial thoughts about where the killer's at.
Yeah, I mean the long drawn out games, I think most people would agree, especially from the survivor end, right? Is not how you want games to go. Killers like more time, but I even think that some of the really long drawn out games are probably not. It just becomes like a stalemate, so they're just kind of waiting for the survivors to interact with their objective, but they're disincentivized from interacting with the generators because they're in such a disadvantageous situation because the drones like can pose such a threat with the exposed and not revealing her exact location because of undetectable and stuff. So, and like she's kind of like a worse ghost face, I think, where she has like less control of her undetectable. She has less control over when she forces the exposed. So it feels like she has even less control, which I think is not great from the killer player's perspective. And at least, yeah, it's kind. I think the worst part of the chapter really is that it directly follows the night. Like I feel like that compounds the issue. Is that we have 2 chapters in a row where most people are even saying like this is a killer that's very similar to the night. They just kind of drop their power, kind of hover in a specific area, and just kind of quarantine those generators essentially from the rest of the map. The rest of the map doesn't exist to them. They pretend it doesn't exist rather, and then just kind of sit in that area. So I think if night didn't exist and this was what came out first, people would be like, not so fun, pretty boring. But I think now that we've had it twice in a row, and by the time we reach whatever we get for the anniversary chapter, it's going to be 9 months between Wesker release, which I think was generally looked upon favorably, and then hopefully something that's more interesting in terms of a killer design with the anniversary. And if it's not, we can talk about it in the future what that means for the outlook of Dead by Daylight. But 3 misses in a row would be pretty bad, especially that it coincides with their anniversary, which is supposed to really build a lot of hype. That's generally when they do, at least prior to last year, have done a lot of licensed, big licenses in particular and stuff with Pyramid Head and stuff a few years back. So Behavior has a lot of pressure on them, I think, to put forth a better killer design. As far as like general counterplay, we were kind of talking about some of the stalemate sort of stuff. Something that I didn't really recognize until actually playing against her yesterday on Monday, or I guess on Sunday, was that she has like the cooldown on when the drone can that unhackable state. So most of the time, if you have one of the claw traps from disabling one of the drones, if you enter the zone, it goes into the unhackable state. But if she manually puts down the drone initially when it starts in the unhackable state, or she activates it from the radar and re-puts it in the unhackable state, it can't fly out of your range for, I think it's 10 or 15 seconds. I'd have to look at the exact timer. So basically when it descends, even with the claw trap, you can rush in and get another disable of the drone for free. So I think when people start recognizing that more, it will lead to less of a stalemate and push more in favor of the survivors. But that's going to be really hard to capitalize on in solo queue if people just straight up don't recognize that that's how the killer can be countered. Add on that onto that a little bit.
Just like a very brief point onto that is Behavior is releasing so many killers that have so much text to them, and this is something that we're going to be talking about in the future. But yeah, I wasn't aware of that, and it's kind of the pinhead effect. There's so many aspects going on with the character. And in some ways, complexity is nice. You can get different like nuances and be able to show different, like have different opportunities for higher skill ceilings to kind of show themselves. But if it's just complexity for complexity's sake, I think that's bad game design. And I think stuff like the timers for when you can hack a drone when you already have a claw trap on versus, how it's placed. And I feel like that's a lot of unnecessary complexity that doesn't really add any kind of gameplay and doesn't allow for any kind of skill ceiling to give the higher skilled killers much of an advantage. I'm not sold on that game design, um, and it's just needlessly complex.
Yeah, and I think on top of that, like the complexity of the timers, in addition to the add-ons, right? The add-ons you could go into the even if you don't own the killer, you could go into the custom game, and if you spend the time yourself and look through all of the add-ons and try to study up and see what you would possibly be encountering, good for you. You could definitely try and study up on that. But even as far as like the timers, it doesn't have that information in the game. You'd have to go and actively search for patch notes to see like what that unhackable state cooldown is, what her cooldown is on being able to set drones, which I don't even think exists. There is no cooldown on when she can drop another drone. That in the PTB there was, and now there isn't. But the unhackable state has like a cooldown. There's been a lot of number changing and stuff from the PTB, so people who tried to go against her initially are going to have to adjust to the new design as well, which I think for a killer that, like you said, is as complex as the Skull Merchant in terms of timers and weird mechanics, having such a drastic shift in how she works from the PTB to it's going to even confuse players who are generally like more mindful of trying to stay informed on how a killer's mechanics work. So from that perspective, it just complicates it further. Even I think as time goes on, people will get more familiar with it, but even then, like casual players aren't going to probably actively seek out patch notes for a specific timers and bother figuring it out. They're just going to see a drone fly up in the air and be like, oh, well, I entered with a claw trap. I guess I can't ever disable it. And now you're not capitalizing on what should be a weakness for that killer.
Well, and it's funny you mentioned that. Kind of an anecdotal aside. Talking about kind of the information for the game not being in the game. I was playing a game as demo a couple days ago, and somebody in the post game chat was saying, "How are you undetectable? You don't have any perks or add-ons that deal with undetectable." And I explained, that's part of demo's power. When you're at the portal, sealing the portal, you become oblivious. I think he was asking about oblivious.
Mhm.
Go with me; it's the same thing. And we were looking at the power, and the power's description for demo does not mention that if you're at the portal, you become oblivious. It doesn't have that listed at all. So, to your point of, these various mechanics, something as simple as, um, you know, being oblivious when you're sealing a demo portal isn't listed in the game, and that's something that I think that behavior could be much more clear about. But to like more of your actual point, yeah, the casual player base doesn't watch our podcast, doesn't watch streams, doesn't read the patch notes. There are tons of players that we have experienced in our own games that I'm sure that all of our watchers have experienced where, you know, the pain res change happened, or the eruption change happened, or the ruin change happened, and they still had it on because that's what they were used to running, and they had no idea that the perks had changed.
Yeah, to piggyback off that, I've seen lately a lot of the nurses still have on the two add-ons that were the old recharge
Mm-hmm.
add-ons, but now they do completely different things, but they just have never changed their build, never bothered reading what the add-ons do now. And so
Yeah.
yeah, I think a lot of people just have a build that they run with. A lot of people don't play every day, maybe play once a week, once every couple of weeks. They just boot up and be like, oh yeah, this is the build that I always run with. I don't care all that much. I just want to get in the game.
Mm-hmm.
So and it puts people at a disadvantage, I think. And I don't know why there's so much information absent from the player base. Like, I don't know why behavior doesn't put it in the game and make it readily accessible. Like having to go outside the game to be informed and understand how the mechanics work really
Yeah,
makes no sense.
just as a another brief aside, I play a lot of Magic the Gathering, and there's an online version of the game, and they will occasionally make online only changes to cards. And when that happens, when you boot up the game, it will have a screen that pops up that says, this card has been changed, blah blah blah. And I feel like that's something that behavior could implement to have the player base, within the resources of the game know, hey, Ruin has changed. Noah doesn't work with Nerfs anymore.
Yeah, maybe even like a small icon or something like
Mm.
updated or new, or maybe new for some of the new perks, but or like updated to like just to highlight. Maybe it's like that their icon is like outlined differently in gold or something like that, just to signify like, hey, this perk is different or this perk is new. Like, why don't you take a look at it so that way you're not caught off guard, something like that.
Yeah.
Speaking of new perks, I guess we'll touch on the killer perks really briefly. It's kind of like a same sort of trend again, just a lot of perks get added to the game and most of them are just never gonna see public matches after the first couple of weeks when people are toying around with them. She has thwack, leverage, and game afoot. Brief descriptions: thwack, when you the next time you break a wall or a pallet after hooking a survivor, survivors within 32 meters scream, reveal their aura for 4 seconds. Leverage is like a slowdown to healing. You get tokens every time that you hook a survivor, and then for the first what is it, for
30 seconds.
30 seconds, yeah, 30 seconds after you get the hook, survivors have a slowdown to healing, and it gets the amount that their slowdown is, it gets more and more the more hooks that you get over the course of the game, and it starts stacking for 5% and keeps going up to a maximum of 50. And then there's this obsession perk called Game Afoot, where if you're chasing the obsession, you get a haste, like a speed boost, when you kick a pallet or a wall or a generator while you're in chase with the obsession. So it's a little bizarre. Basically, you have to like make a pit stop at one of these things, or you have to like kick a freshly thrown pallet or something in order to gain the speed boost, and you have to be chasing the obsession. It also like changes the whenever you hit a survivor, if they're the survivor with the most chase time, which isn't even something you can really track actively in a game,
Yeah.
they become the obsession, so that way you can try to gain more access to it. You want to, I guess, touch on any or all of those perks and give some thoughts, but
Yeah,
they're a
so
little weird.
we'll talk about thwack a little bit more coming up. But the last one you mentioned, uh, I have been seeing quite a bit of people running that perk with Rancor and Nemesis and play with your food to try and do uh, some odd obsession builds, trying
Uh,
to
Session
trying to
manipulation.
yeah, trying to get play with your food stacks and then like Rancor multiple people in the end game. I don't think it's really good. It's definitely like um, it's got the potential to be fun, but I don't know that it's good. Um, and like you mentioned, there's not an easy way of tracking that. I feel like if that perk were to ever become good, behavior would have to implement some kind of timer that's associated with each survivor, maybe like on the HUD next to their character model, um, that would track how long they had been chased. I don't know that that's feasible, and I don't know that that's reasonable. I feel like that would add extra clutter. I don't know that that's a good design choice. Um, it's certainly a perk that's capable of being fun and interesting, and it can definitely add some extra tension on the survivor side too. During the end game, you're trying to play protect the president, but
Right.
you kind of the president can be swapped at a moment's notice. So it's certainly capable of being fun, but I don't have any aspirations of it being good.
Yeah, I mean, there's very few ways, like for the people being one of the best ways, I think, to like pull who the obsession is from the survivor perspective. But yeah, it's kind of like a bizarre. It's also weird, like just thinking about it, right? If you're chasing the obsession, then you basically can't ever run it with save the best for last, right? Because you're
Right.
just always losing stacks, which like, and especially for the new killer utilizing save the best for last so much because she's an M1 killer, it's kind of like counterintuitive in terms of, we've seen this issue pop up where like the killer's teachables don't necessarily work with the killer that they belong to, which is a very
Mhm.
weird choice. So it like forces you to have to unlock the teachable version, so that way you can try it with other killers, but not the new one. Outside of, I guess, if you want to clear some adept challenges, but yeah, it's a little bit strange. Yeah, thwack is like, to me, is just like a more situational, less consistent nowhere to hide. Like nowhere
Mhm.
to hide does similar stuff, but gens don't go away after you kick them. You don't need the survivors to essentially like set you up by having a pallet thrown. Right, like some maps have one, maybe zero breakable walls, so you can't use it on anything other than a thrown pallet. And like the killers that you can use it on are weird. Like as someone who plays Huntress, survivors are disincentivized from throwing pallets a lot of the time. They're trying to keep them up and just hold W around loops instead of throwing and then just giving away free hits. So certain killers, Nurse is another one, probably not going to see a lot of pallets thrown, so she can never really use that perk either. So it's like there's a lot of like nuance and extra situationalness, I guess you could call it, as like rather than nowhere to hide. Yeah, very very abstract
You
word.
you could.
But
I don't know if anybody should,
yeah,
but
yeah. But nowhere to hide, I think it plays a really similar role, but just has way more consistency. So I think people will get over thwack pretty quickly and just go back to nowhere to hide, which I think it clearly outclasses it. And then leverage, similar situation. It's niches providing heal slowdown, but it's put on a timer. The effect starts out super weak. It relies on you outplaying the survivors first in order to be able to get any use. And so like it just takes a lot of buildup, and the effect isn't crazy when you can just use other heal slowdowns like Sloppy or Gift of Pain, which also works on your Scourge hooks, and then in addition provides a secondary effect of when they heal, they get hit with a slowdown on gen speed. So Colorophobia is another one with like distressing, those kind of builds and stuff. To I think all of those just slow down healing way more effectively. Franklin's, if you want to try and deal with med kits, stuff like that. There's just a lot of better ways, I think, of counteracting heal speeds than this perk, so I just don't really see it
yeah,
being much use.
and one of the, we've talked about this killer really lends herself to a 3-gen play style, and we've seen that a lot recently. And even killers who previously like weren't really I don't want to say designed for 3-genning, but really lent themselves to 3-genning. We've seen that pop up in our games countless times, that killers are playing for 3-gens all the time. But as a killer who really lends herself to a 3-gen setup, this perk doesn't really work well, because one of the best ways to counter that is if you get hit, you run to the opposite side of the map from the 3-gen and you reset there. And then you go back. And so, even if this is at, 9 hooks, or eight hook states where everybody's dead on hook, if people are running to the opposite side of the map where the killer isn't, it doesn't matter. The perk only lasts for 30 seconds, but let's ignore the timer, right? Let's say that all of the heals are 40% slower or 45% slower. Let's say that somebody is dead. It doesn't matter, because there's an infinite untraversable space between where the killer is and where the survivors are, that it could take 5 minutes to get a heal off. If the killer's not ever going to go over there, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, and not to mention that a lot of times when people are playing for 3-gens, they're not really playing for hooks. So racking up either charges of thwack or tokens on leverage, a lot of times they're not really building that up. They're playing for as few hooks as possible, just to also coincide with the most kills, where they're trying to like either camp people or just like have it so they slug it out, or just play hit and run and don't really commit to anything and hold a stalemate. So they're not ever getting use out of those perks. So it just like it doesn't even fit the current meta, which I think have been talking about, not really the healthiest state for the game, but it just doesn't even mesh with what killers are trying to do anyway. So I don't really see much going on. As far as the survivors, right? Survivors, 2 siblings, Renato and Talita. So they gave us 6 survivor perks this time, introduced this new teamwork classification, similar to, I guess, from the killer side, right? Like Scourge hooks or hexes. Survivors have boons. So it's a new, interesting classification. We have Blood Rush, Teamwork, Collective Stealth, Background Player, and then Friendly Competition, Teamwork, Power of Two, and Cut Loose. They all do. The teamwork ones require either you to heal someone else or for you to healed, and then it gives a buff to either of you. Power of Two provides you with speed boost, and collective stealth provides you with this lack of scratch marks. But you have to stay within a range of each other. The range is really tight; it's only 12 meters. So as soon as you leave, you lose that effect, and the cooldown is 140 seconds, which is super long. Can't use the perk again, so you have to stay grouped up. Maybe try to capitalize with like Prove Thyself and co-oping on gen, stuff like that. But any of those perks you want to highlight and talk about real quickly?
Yeah, so the main one that I want to talk about, well, I guess there's two that I want to talk about. So first off, for teamwork power of two, that's the one that you were mentioning. That when you finish healing another survivor, you both move 5% faster as long as you stay within 12 meters of each other. This is very similar to Blood Pact from Cheryl. Um, there are some differences for sure. So Blood Pact is based off of obsession, and like, so you're more limited on who you can interact with this on. Power of Two is more open. It doesn't have to, like we were talking earlier about the killer perk. It can change obsessions, and this won't have any effect on that. So that's good. But it's uh way more. I think that Blood Pact is a better perk. It doesn't have any kind of a cooldown. Uh, they both have very similar. You have to stay together. Requirements to it. Uh, I I see a lot of similarities there, and I don't know why they decided that this was the effect to do when they have Blood Pact already. Um, Blood Pact has the aura reading as well. I just think that it's a much better perk, and very similar. A lot of overlap there.
Yeah, and especially that like Blood Pact can be procced by heals in either direction, right? Like
Hmm.
the obsession can heal the other person, or that person can heal the obsession and still get use. Whereas one of the team, it's right, it's power of two when you finish healing another survivor, but
Right.
with collective stealth, the survivor has to heal you. But they're not going to even know that you have the perk until after they heal you, and then you get the like icon for the effect. So it's like it's another couple of perks that are really hard to use in solo queue. I guess they're creating these perks for people in comms, people playing with friends and trying to synergize some builds, but most of the player base isn't playing with a full squad a lot of the time. So these perks are just going to be, I think, left more in the dust. They're going to be like occasional stuff that people try and use, but the effects are like hard to get to work, and they don't can't reproc it, so you can't use it multiple times. They don't tell you where the other teammate is, like Blood Pact is, like you were talking about. So they're kind of weird. Blood Rush is interesting, where it gives you the second use of the exhaustion, but I know a lot of content creators have already talked about this, where it's just going to incentivize people to tunnel you on your last hook and not let you ever heal, because you have to be fully healed and exhausted and on your last hook, and also have an exhaustion perk that you want to synergize it with. So it's very hard to get use if the killer wants to make sure you don't get use out of it. Um, Background
Yeah.
player got changed from the PTB. It initially gave you a speed boost when you unhooked somebody else. Now it gives you a speed boost when someone else gets picked up. If you choose to run, at least if you just stay walking, it won't activate. But it's like it's a 4 seconds instead of like the 3 seconds for sprint burst, but it only activates when someone gets picked up. I just feel like sprint burst can do the same thing if you just keep it ready to go. And like it's trying to set up, I think, for flashlight, flashbang, pallet save type of stuff, but sprint burst gives you more flexibility, in my opinion. So I don't think the extra second of moving at 150% is all that worth for everything that you sacrifice by not having, say, sprint burst.
Yeah, different player is definitely interesting and can lend itself to those saving play styles. Also, it can get you closer into range for breakout plays, so you can be further away. Um, I do think that it's really good design that it doesn't force it to be used. It doesn't force you into exhaustion when a survivor is picked up. Um, that's something that you know kind of has a leg up against sprint burst, is that whenever you run with sprint burst, it, as long as you're not exhausted, it will proc. So you could just move a tiny bit and sprint burst will happen. So I do like that design, but yeah, I mean, this isn't gonna um, dethrone sprint burst slash dead hard as the two best exhaustion perks in the game.
Yeah, and
I do think that it's good, and I think that it's interesting, and will have some definitely hype plays associated with it. And I don't think that it's a bad perk by any means, but yeah, I don't think that it's unseating sprint burst or dead
yeah,
hard.
I think too situational in that regard. And I guess the other two are friendly competition, where if you finish a co-op gen, you both get a 5% increase in your repair speed for 75 seconds. It's pretty good, I think, especially when paired with Proof Thyself. It kind of like lets you work on a gen together, benefit from Proof Thyself, and then carry that like Proof Thyself boost, even if you go your separate ways. It's another gen speed buff, but it's a little, co-oping on gens is generally the inefficient way to play. So anything that requires you to stay together, similar to the teamwork perks, are technically counter to what you should be doing if you're trying to play optimal. So a lot of those things might get left behind. The cut loose thing is really interesting. It's like after your first fast vault in a chase, you get a 6-second window of being able to infinitely perform silent fast vaults or medium vaults, depending. So on windows or pallets, but your first one isn't silent, so you could pair it with like quick and quiet, have a first silent vault, and now you could just keep vaulting. Obviously, the condition being that if you keep spamming a vault on a window in particular, the entity blocker will pop up. So, but you could do it indefinitely on pallets. It requires, I think, line of sight blocker. It's interesting. I think it could mind game killers in situations by getting rid of the sound notification. But so far, I haven't really seen it used all that much. Whether I'm playing as survivor or as killer, I haven't really seen survivors feel like it was worth
Yeah,
running so far.
I haven't seen it yet either. I think that there is an interesting build where you could run like this along with Quick and Quiet Live and maybe like Dance with Me, where you're able to uh, maybe condition the killer the first time to Quick and Quiet Live Dance with Me away on a window or a pallet, and then the next time you can use that as a mind game to double back and use your live to change the direction. But again, like you said, that does require line of sight blockers, and then it does also rely on um, the conditioning of the killer, and if you think that they'll actually fall for it. Um, when I play Dead by Daylight, I tend to not give my opposing side all that much credit. Um, but I do think that it's interesting.
Hmm. I think that there'll be people will try to make them work with some unique builds, but I don't see like really any of them as like ultimately being sort of meta defining perks. But these perks generally get buffed after or nerfed, depending if they come out to be too strong after a few months. So maybe they buff like those teamwork perks and stuff a few months from now, maybe sometime over the summer with like their mid chapter, and maybe we see them put more in the spotlight. But I think for now, people will be experimenting for a couple weeks, and then that initial hype of the new content will probably die down, and people will kind of go back to their builds. The couple other things, I guess, with the chapter, the map rework, so to speak. Usually the graphics updates and stuff with the maps generally coincide with either some like breakable walls put on like main buildings or some general just redesigns. They didn't opt to do that basically this time with either so the Red Forest was the rework, Temple of Purgation, which is Plague's map, or Mother's Dwelling, which is Huntress's map. Those buildings basically stayed exactly the same in terms of actual layout. So and the rest of the map is pretty much the same. The filler areas are a little bit different, but they generally, they kept the size, they kept pretty much everything, and people were kind of hoping that Mother's Dwelling, being the largest map in the game, would get toned down a little bit, but they again opted not to do that either. This was like purely a facelift essentially on the maps, rather than actually redesigning it for any sort of balance purpose. So it's a little bit unique in that regard compared to some other, like the Macmillan, Coldwind, Autohaven, all that kind of stuff, like got really reworked, very different tile design, but they opted not to in this case. And then also the update to Shelterwood's getting a main building, which is nice because that map is has been long maligned for having such a vast amount of dead zones. So now you have a building that seems usable, but not like there's no real like god windows or anything like that. There's a couple of pallets, there's some useful looping spots, but nothing so far that stands out to me as like problematic. But yeah, your thoughts?
Yeah, so let me start with Mother's Dwelling, because I actually have quite a bit to say about this map. So one thing that I have noticed is in the main building, on the inside, where there are two windows across from another, one where basement can spawn and one by the stairs that go up to the second floor. I have noticed previously to that, you would almost always have one of those windows be open. And I've been seeing it more recently where both of those windows are closed, which reduces a lot of the options that the survivor has of looping the main building. Secondly, the hills on both Temple and Mother's Dwelling, there used to be hills on those maps where there would be two ways of going up and then a drop off on the last side. And I've noticed that I've been seeing a lot of them where there are now 3 ramps going up. And that is good for a lot of survivor gameplay. However, as a balanced landing user, that's bad for me.
Yeah.
Balanced landing is one of my favorite perks. It's my favorite exhaustion perk. And on the old maps, I would be able to work on any gens that were up there very safely because I could run off of the back and balance landing away if the killer came. Now I've been seeing hill setups where that's not possible. So that's something of note. Lastly, both the map reworks for Mother's Dwelling and Temple of Purgation are beautiful. They look so good. But how in the year of our Lord 2023 are we introducing new fat shames into maps in Dead by Daylight? There are so many. They're everywhere. And especially when you're going from a map that has already been around to introducing these fat shames for both survivor and killer that can just absolutely change the entire course of a game. And it's an issue that Behavior has been well aware of, that they've actively taken steps to remove in the past. It's just kind of mind-boggling to me. Visually, amazing. I love the Red Forest changes. But yeah, I don't know how they introduce these fat shames whenever they change a map.
Yeah, I mean, to add on to that, yeah, it's been an issue where, like, even maps that have existed and been fine, then they, like, I guess try to mess with the map generation algorithm, and then it puts random trees too close to tiles, and all of a sudden loops get, like, changed. There was it's popped up multiple times, basically, since the Garden of Joy map has been introduced, where there's that random huge bush that spawns literally attached to the back of Shack, like near where the pallet spawns, and just creates, like, you just turn and you're looking over your shoulder to see if the killer is actually coming, and then you just face plant into a bush and you're just dead. Or if you're coming from the other direction and it's just like extends the loop. It's like, it's really, really bizarre how that stuff gets introduced, because it was not there when the map came out, and then it was introduced, and then they got rid of it, and then a few weeks back it was there again, and now it seems like this most recent patch they got rid of it again. So maybe we'll see it again in a few weeks. I have no idea. It's something that like keeps becoming issues with maps. And like you said, for the new map, it's like still an issue. The bounce landing thing is interesting, although it's you lose the Red Forest one, but now you have more stuff to balance landing on Shelter Woods. So there's that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Flip side.
Shelter Woods. I haven't actually played more than a couple games on the new Shelter Woods, so I haven't experimented too much with it. But I love having a building there, like you were saying. That map has, like, prior to the rework, the map was a dead zone. There were times you would spawn in where there were literally 5 loopable tiles on the entire map with like 3 pallets. Like it was a dream for a lot of killers and a nightmare for a lot of survivors. One thing that I have heard that I haven't experienced is that survivors have been trying to meme the killers by getting cosmetics that look like the mannequins on Shelter Woods and cosplaying as one, which I think is hilarious. But yeah, I'm interested to test more of the main building, especially with balanced landing. I know that there's a window up top by the like bar area, and so I'm interested to see how loopable that main building is now, in particular with balance.
Yeah, for sure. I've played on it a couple times. Like you said, it's still like, it's one of 30 plus maps in the game. So unless you're bringing Macmillan and trying to just RNG out of those 5 maps to see it more often, you're not going to get to experience it in live matches too much. But it feels better. But we'll see. Yesterday I was on it a couple of times, and there's still a lot of dead zone around like the edges of the maps, and they are still putting generators in those dead zones. I wish that they would put generators closer to tiles, maybe even if they're not that strong without pallets, but just like give some sort of resource to run to rather than just like a main building or main tile that has like no objective, because like then the killer just ignores it and the survivors always run there, and then they just split off, and that just kind of like ends interaction. So we'll see though, I think with a little more experience and testing. And then I guess the last kind of stuff is they did a couple of perk changes, and I guess we'll focus more on the mechanic change that no one asked for, but
no one asked for and absolutely no one wants.
Yeah, so Eruption, which was the super problematic, incapacitate for 25 seconds whenever someone gets down. They kick gens, the gens are prepped, and then they down a survivor, and anyone who was on one of those generators basically can't do anything except walk around for 25 seconds. That effect has been completely replaced with an aura reading effect for the killer on anyone who was on it. It feels a lot better. I think there are some killers who might be able to snowball it with good movement abilities, particularly some of the additionally higher tier killers like Nurse or Blight, who can move around and try to capitalize on that information. And then Any Means, which just got its cooldown completely removed. So it has, as someone who's tried to make Any Means work before in the past, now it feels really, really nice, particularly against killers that like Nemesis stands out, where you can always lead a zombie to a pallet, kill it with the pallet, and then your cooldown is always there to reset. So you can always deal with the zombies very efficiently. And then now that there's no cooldown, you don't lose the aura reading effect ever. So it's kind of like a really strong version of Alert, where you're just always seeing the most pallets that get thrown. So you're effectively tracking the killer, which is really nice. I think the perk's good. It's really fun to use as well, which always helps. And I like what they did with both changes. I wish that it wasn't just 2 perks that got touched. I wish that this is a constant request from the community. Beyond just ourselves, just wish there was more updates to perks. Yeah, I guess if you want to add on to that.
Yeah, so kind of what you were talking about, where it works kind of like Alert. It also works kind of like Bond, where ideally survivors are only throwing pallets if they're in chase, and so you can get a really good sense of where the killer is based off of what pallets are being thrown by your survivor teammates. Um, as um, as far as eruption goes, you were mentioning the aura reading and being good for high mobility killers. One killer that I think really benefits a lot from this that isn't getting as much spotlight is Oni. The fact that you down somebody and you can use that aura reading to um, track another survivor and rush to wherever they are to be able to down them, I think has huge upside. Oni does have kind of the detriment where when he downs somebody in his power, he bangs his Kanabo multiple times, and you're kind of locked in that animation. So being able to see where the auras are, you kind of get less benefit of it. But as long as you can see where some of the survivors are, you know exactly where to rush to next. And I think that's really good. And if you down somebody with your basic aim one before you pop your power, then you have full range of motion to see where they are, pop your power, and then go there. So I think that Oni would benefit from this change quite a bit. I mean, everybody knew that the way that Eruption was prior to this update was not okay. And it is certainly a nerf to the perk how it is now, but it's much healthier for the game, and you can get some unique benefit that you weren't able to get before with killers like you were mentioning of Nurse and Blight, and I think Oni as well.
Yeah, Oni is really interesting. It's kind of like a cross map way for him to use his power instead of Infectious Fright, which is like a more
Mhm.
close range. I've seen like Huntresses try to use it too to try to go for some cross map stuff as well, which is
Yeah.
interesting. Um, yeah, I mean, I like both changes. I think that they're really good. And then I guess the last thing that we'll touch on, which is the mechanic, which is
Oh boy.
piggybacking off of Infectious Fright, actually, is the scream change that they, for some reason, have never mentioned was coming. That didn't put in the PTB. I've never seen anyone request for this change ever. And basically, they reworked it so that the scream that like alert doesn't you can't hear screams for as the killer unless you're within 19 meters. I think it's 19 meters of the screen now, which just completely annihilates a bunch of perks, and in particular just destroys Doctor, who just can't use his power. Like the fact that you don't get alerted by random screaming from people in tier 3 really disincentivizes, or at least just nerfs the benefits that you get of keeping people in tier 3 madness. A lot of perks. I mean, Eruption also gets nerfed by that. Pain Resonance, which you see all the time. I know we were trying to figure out perks that are affected. Face the Darkness, which is like is popping up here and there, but you also get less. You don't get the random screaming benefit if they're not close enough to you. Infectious Fright basically has its range cut in half, which just makes no sense. And Iron Maiden, as someone who plays Hunters all the time, I don't get alerted if people are cross map trying to hide from barbecue or other like aura reading stuff. If they're in a locker and they pop out, I just don't even know anymore that they're exposed. And then obviously the huge perk that gets nerfed is Make Your Choice, which was a relatively niche build sort of perk. You didn't see it all that often, although it's a pretty strong effect, and it would and it was like a counter tunneling perk by design, which I think is something
Right.
that's always healthy for the game. So
Yeah.
there's a couple of other instances. I know we're Thwack, which was the new Skull Merchant perk, just like gets a little bit nerfed as well. And then there's the Scream add-on for the Knight. That's pretty much it, but like I just don't understand nerfing that. Like, it's info, and I don't understand why you're just further narrowing the list of usable perks in the game when we already have that issue. It just like compounds an issue that was already present.
Yeah, so it's so bizarre to me that in the patch where behavior introduces a perk that causes survivors to scream at 32 meters, they decide that's the time to nerf screaming notifications. It doesn't make any sense to me. But yeah, like Doctor in particular is loathing this change. It his static blast has such strong information gain, and as someone who used to run a lot of Doctor, I ran it with whispers and I never ran calm add-ons. So knowing that you're shocking somebody and being able to pinpoint where they are based off of the whispers proc is like really important gameplay. And it's compounded even more for people who do run calm, where your terror radius is larger, so your effect of your static blast is larger, but now you can see from the HUD if their madness increases, but you can't tell where they were. It's such a big change for Doctor, and one that is a big nerf. And like you were saying, the major, in my opinion, the major perk that got nerfed is make your choice. It completely invalidates any information that that perk gains, and really, in my estimation, you have to now run make your choice with Floods of Rage if you want to make value out of it, because then you can see where the unhooker is going, who it was, and you can track them that way. I don't know what was going through their mind that they decided that this change was necessary or good or wanted. I see no positives from this whatsoever.
Yeah, it's like very bizarre, and like you said, with make your choice now, you basically need some sort of additional perk to try to figure out who it was, because previously you would use the scream, because every survivor has a unique scream, to figure out which of the survivors, assuming there's no duplicates, but usually it would help you at least narrow it down to 2. You're probably at most, unless you've got like, you know, a survivor with friends that's got, yeah, something like that, but it would at least help you figure out who it was. You know where the hook was, and so you can kind of use some context clues to figure out generally where they went, and you know exactly which survivor a large majority of the time of who's exposed. Now you just don't have any of that, so now you need a specific aura reading effect in order to figure out who it was. And again, it's an exposed perk, which means it doesn't work with killer powers. It only works with M1. So it was a perk that already didn't synergize very well with a lot of different killer characters. So it's just like, it's just a perk that further gets pushed to the back burner. I hope that they just revert this change entirely. Honestly, it doesn't benefit anybody. It doesn't help. Yes, it helps survivors technically, but like, those survivors, I think, were complaining about the range of screams if you do them cross map or whatever. Like, that's how, like, it's a very select handful of perks slash killer powers slash add-ons that it would ever work with. And as we were trying to figure out what's affected, somehow this makes Calm Spirit even more useless. Like, Calm Spirit has been like something we talked about where it was one of those perks that was reworked in the big perk change patch from last summer, where they tried to somehow like make it better by making it so your cleansing and blessing of totems and your opening of chests is silent. But now when you do those actions, they take longer. So and now like, you already don't get detected very far from screams, so unless you're specific, like, I don't know what it counters anymore other than being like right next to a doctor using static blast, which, I mean, if you're that close, you're probably getting detected a lot of the time anyway, by just them seeing you, or if you're trying to stay in close range against like infectious fright. Other than that, I don't even understand why you would. It's even less reason to run a perk that basically had no reason to run it in the first place. So
yeah,
I don't know what they do with all of these perks, because now they've just been kind of cast aside for a lot of reasons.
Yeah, so we were talking earlier about the fact that behavior doesn't have very good transparency on a lot of the casual player base. Can you imagine being a player who loads up, once a week with your, pig make your choice build, and you hook somebody and you run away and you're like, hey, I got him. I'm gonna go and I'm gonna hit them while they're exposed, and the unhook happens and you don't hear anything because they implemented this scream change. And how the hell are they supposed to know?
Yeah, not mentioned in game whatsoever.
It's it's bizarre. I really don't understand why they did this.
Yeah, and it's like, it's also weird because they test drive a lot of these changes ahead of time with like the struggle change when you're on hook, the wiggle change when you're being carried by a killer. They tried to like give the player base a heads up of like, hey, why don't we test drive these first before we like force it upon you? Get some feedback. People generally liked it, and then they went ahead and made the change. Now it's just like this is just forced upon you. They clearly failed to account for existing killers and perks in the game and how this would be impacted, because they, like you said with like Thwack, is they introduced a perk that has a 32-meter range, but as we know, it's only a 19-meter range because you can't hear outside of 19 meters. So what is the point of, I mean, I guess you get the aura reading from Thwack on top of that, but you don't get the scream. But so now distortion just straight up counters it entirely, rather than needing like, now you don't even have the, it's just like there's so many things going on. And again, for Doctor, he's got the I think he's got one of the add-ons where you can see auras or whatever when they
When they tear up.
when they tear
Mhm.
up. So now distortion counters Doctor, which is like, again, just like, why run Calm Spirit to counter Doctor, which was like the big, that was the big meme, is like, oh, I'm running Calm Spirit, hope we get it, go against the Doctor. But like, now distortion counters him more effectively in more situations than Calm Spirit does. It just, it, none of it makes sense. There's no real, I can't
Yeah.
see any sort of like line of logic that they took to be like, this is why we should make this change. They just did it, didn't give us a heads up, and I guess now we're stuck with it until maybe they hopefully decide like, okay, this was a mistake.
Yeah, it's so weird that they actively put this like on their list of um affirmative changes. You know, it's not like this was an unintentional effect that popped up. Like they chose for this to happen. And they mentioned that like within 19 meters it was a three-dimensional um uh stream like audio notification so that you could try and locate where the survivor was. My hope is that they're going to be fixing it so that further from 19 meters it will be this like two-dimensional thing, and that is an unintended consequence. But yeah, right now as it stands where they just aren't streaming at all, it's awful. It's really
Yeah,
bad.
yeah. Perhaps this is like a first step to them trying to redesign how screams get detected, and they just route a way to make this change, and they only went like part way. But again, it's just like, why not wait until the whole change is ready, so that way in the meantime mechanics and gameplay isn't affected. But this is where we are now. So um any last thoughts, I guess, with the chapter? I think we went pretty in depth and covered pretty much everything that was added.
Yeah, yeah, I think I'm good. Overall, I know that the reception to this chapter has been pretty negative. We have seen some positives. I did see something online that said that the sales for this chapter are very good. It was listed on Steam's, I think, top 10. If not top 10, it was pretty close to it. So you know the reactions are justifiably critical, and I think that that's good. I think that behavior needs to understand that. Um, you know, the game has enough zoning killers. The game has enough killers that lend themselves to three gens, especially coming off the back of two of them back to back. I think that like the community's criticism is very justified and good, but um, you know, there are some good things that came from it too. The eruption change, the any means change, the visuals of the map reworks, I think are great. Just fix those fast shames. Come on.
Yeah, I mean that's pretty much, you know, I'm kind of used to the lack of super impactful for perks, so none of that really catches me off guard. I hope they make some of the teamwork stuff a little bit easier to use, a little bit less cool, maybe extend the range, that kind of stuff. Because I think it's interesting. I think different changes in playstyle rather than just like being off on your own and trying to synergize and have some sort of actual teamwork is a cool thing to add to the game. So but yeah, we'll see if they update those in the, but I guess that pretty much covers it, and we'll try and bring this out to you again and try and give you some updates, see where the chapter leads you next week, and we'll see you then.
Bye.
Later.